Please, ladies first, Nicole.
Hi, Greg. My name is Nicole, as you know, for those of you that don't. I'm so excited to be chatting with Greg Stillman, who I've been liaising with regarding Capsule, regarding the sponsorship of Miram for the collection, basically since March. And it's been just an absolutely incredible process, and I'm so excited to be chatting to Greg today. Just a little bit about the science behind Capsule and kind of how we managed to sort of realize a fully circular collection. Yeah. Greg, introduce yourself.
I appreciate that, Nicole. I must say it's been a real pleasure to get to know you over the few months. I think you've brought such a level of curiosity and like interest and real genuine like desire for understanding, which has been just an absolute pleasure to like listen to and try to meet with our own understanding, our own science, our own creative process. So I've really valued the last few months, and so it's a pleasure to get you back on live.
Oh, brilliant. So I think I would love if you would just introduce to our viewers just a little bit about you, your background, and also Natural Fiber Welding, which is the company that makes Miram and that is sponsoring me. Just a little bit about natural.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a little bit about me. I don't know anything about fashion. I'm gonna let you in a secret. I'm a chemist by training. I spent most of my early career in renewables and clean energy. I just really like the environment. You could call me a tree hugger. I grew up in a little town called Salt Lake City, Utah. Maybe it's not so little anymore. And I just spent a lot of time outdoors. And so I come from, I guess, a very strong environmental ethic. And after moving to the Netherlands, where I live now, had an opportunity to get involved in textiles, kind of learn about the industry a little bit. And the more you learn, the more you realize there's something not right. I think this resonates with you, Nicole, and your own experience coming out of school. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. But it's strange because I think the world and most consumers know about like solar and the importance of solar and the importance of electric vehicles, but there's just not. I find there's very little attention. I mean now it's a big topic, but still it's not. I don't think there's as much attention around textiles and fashion and kind of the environmental challenges around this topic as there should be. So I kind of thought it was an interesting area to get involved with, and now I'm working for this startup called Natural Fiber Welding, NFW. We essentially make all plant-based materials, where what we focus on is enhancing the performance elements that are already provided by Mother Nature. And so if that's cotton, there's certain parts of cotton from a science perspective that cotton is just a killer material, and it just does really amazing stuff. And so we want to take those best properties and maybe let's say fix and tune some of the weaker properties such that those natural materials just perform at all new levels, so that consumers want to wear more natural materials. And we think that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, Mother Nature will figure out how to, what to do with those materials. And, if they can be recycled, all the better. Some of our materials can be recycled quite a lot, Miram specifically. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about NFW. I'm sure we can probably get more into our materials. But I would love to know kind of your story, Nicole, about, how did you come to be a young designer? What was it like coming out of school? Because you probably came out of school when this whole sustainable fashion thing was, there's a lot of bad press. There was a lot of issues coming into the media. So I would love to hear kind of your early days as they are.
Sure. So I'm a fashion and digital designer. I am based in London. My practice centers around kind of the complexity of stratified identity. I grew up in the U.S. My whole family are Venezuelan immigrants to the U.S., and so I grew up mostly in California. Was super lucky to grow up there, and I moved to London when I was 18 to study fashion at Central St. Martin's, and I studied fashion print. So I sort of studied obviously sort of design of the garment, but also like with a huge emphasis on the surface of it. And when I decided to study fashion, it was kind of with the explicit intention of pursuing creative practice that's kind of inherently centered around the body. So the body has always been an interest of mine. And then that's kind of where fashion, resounded with that. I started school, and then I started to realize a few years working in, and especially kind of working in the industry and in my final year, that the industry has a lot of problems, and deciding to be a creative when you're young is not the same as deciding to be a creative when you're older, and when you're kind of aware of what you're kind of up against. I would say the decision to be a creative, and especially a fashion creative, is a decision that I have to kind of make every day at this point. It's a decision I made because the industry has so many problems, and we just need expert attention on it. So that's kind of my sort of background of it. I graduated Central St. Martin's in 2019, so last year. So this collection that I've produced, that'll be presented digitally next week on Friday, is a sort of a smaller capsule collection that sort of takes a lot of the visuality and research behind my BA collection, but actually puts it into usable products, which is kind of the first step in creating something sustainable. Is kind of, do we need this in the first place? And if we don't, then maybe let's rethink that. So kind of creating something consumable, usable for people to wear, and also thinking about sort of approaching creative practice with a mindset that for a product to be sustainable in its real definition, it needs to do one of two things. So A, it needs to either pull rubbish and pollutants out of the environment and recirculate them back into human spaces, or it needs to both start and finish in the ground. So basically it needs to be plant-based and compost fully. I must stipulate that it was Natural Fiber Welding's sponsorship of Miram that allowed for the successful production of a capsule collection in which design and visuality are directly informed by what I believe is the real definition of the word sustainability, as like able to be sustained. So I can't play up my gratitude towards Natural Fiber.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. It's such a hard concept to try to think about, and it's used so freely, let's say, in the industry. So I really like your definitions. I can play off of that and tell our viewers what exactly is miram. It's going to get into this start and finish in the ground. So what I'm holding up here that for folks is this like little squeegee, this little like weird looking, almost looks like an eraser, is natural rubber, so latex from the rubber tree. Latex is harvested by a tapping process. So you might see, if you Google like tapping latex trees, they kind of they score the bark, and then you get a milky substance, and then within that milky substance is rubber, and rubber is one of the world's most durable materials. When you think about rubber, most people think, okay, rubber in my tires on my car, and I drive a lot on my car, and those rubber that never wears down. That's true. That rubber is often synthetic, so that rubber is not going to meet your definition, Nicole, because it might have started, even though most rubber is entirely synthetic, it starts as oil. But you could have natural rubber tires, but it certainly won't finish in the ground, and that's because most of the modern materials, the durable materials we love and enjoy, are part synthetic. They have some bonding there that takes what could be natural, what was a natural polymer, and turns it into an entirely synthetic material. And the moment that happens, we're going to break your rules. It's not going to be able to return. But we keep everything in miram, like our rubber. We use cotton, so recycled cotton. We also use a lot of different bass fibers. So this one is coconut. Hopefully folks can see the little coconut fibers from the husks. And all these natural materials we keep in their unadulterated natural state. So we don't add glues, we don't add synthetic polyurethanes, no plastics, and thus at the end of life, you know, I'm utterly confident that we're going to meet your definition here, Nicole, where it certainly started in a tree and can very well finish in the ground. But even more exciting is this is probably a little hard to see, but in this little test tube is a set of ground up miram that we can actually recycle back into new miram. And I have some products that, well, I actually gave them away. I'm so sorry. I have some recycled miram that I could show our viewers, but it's essentially you can recycle it indefinitely, which could be very exciting for product take back bottles and others. But at the end of the day, if it ends up in a landfill, if it ends up in your garden, it'll turn back into compost and turn back into plants essentially. And that's really where everything at NFW starts is the power plants.
Yeah, no, and it's really amazing because the sponsorship of miram in my collection has translated to vegan leather garments and accessories. And I'm actually going to show you guys a preview of some of the garments that were made with miram, so you guys can see what it'll actually translate to. But I know that a conversation I often have with fellow vegans is that sort of a lot of vegan leather alternatives unfortunately contain plastic, and a lot of times it's in really hidden places, like in certain bonds or kind of in liners or coatings, and places just that it's just absolutely impossible to separate. And that debate of kind of real leather versus synthetic leather at that point becomes really, really hazy. I'm just going to share my screen. Please let me know, Greg, if you can see what I'm sharing. So let me pull up.
But I love that last topic. So after we show your designs, I want to come back to that one because we talk about that one almost every day at NFW with miram. So, but please let me see what you've been working on.
So this is a preview of like a really kind of just cute printed miram leather dress. And then the tights are actually not supplied by Natural Fiber Welding. They're supplied by a company called Swedish Stockings.
Oh, so I love them.
They're supplied by a company that produces recycled nylon stockings and then also kind of takes the stockings back when they're done. Mm-hmm. But you can see as well the 3D preview of the miram dress. So the hugest issue that Greg and I have been discussing for months and months and months and months is if we're going to print on a piece of sort of plant leather, how are we going to make sure that it composts? Because a lot of times we don't think about, again, what Greg was talking about, the binders in a fabric. In this case, it's kind of, it's UV ink that's sitting on the miram. And so that brings in a whole other level of questions as to, okay, so if we're designing with function in mind, if we're designing primarily with the goal of creating a product that goes back into the ground, then what you get essentially is that the visuality and the design end up reflecting those values. And in this case, when we're adding a print, there was a few things we needed to sort of discuss. So we looked at EU regulation. The EU regulation specifically it's the specific number is EN 13432. It's an EU regulation on compostability of, I believe, materials, but I think it textiles comes under it, but I believe it's also kind of covering things like food packaging that are printed. So when you kind of get those compostable coffee cups, that kind of thing, what like kind of how does it have to be printed in a way that retains the compostability? So we looked at the regulation, and the regulation firstly states that no more than 5% of the total weight of the whole item can be non-compostable. So if you have 95% miram, no more than 5% of this garment can be ink, essentially, because the ink's not compostable. And then within that 5%, no individual color can exceed 1%. So basically, if we look at this dress that I'm sharing right now, the inks are going to be something like a white ink, and then some kind of combination of CMYK pigments. So what that means is that the spot ink, the spot white in itself cannot exceed more than 1% of the total 5% of the print. So kind of same thing with the cyan ink, the magenta ink, the yellow ink, the black, all those colors kind of in combination with each other, they can't exceed more than 1%. So that's kind of the main, that's kind of the main rule that we were sticking by when doing the print. And on my end, what that looks like is actually changing the image if necessary, because if an image is too heavy, then it's going to compromise on the compostability of the garment. The way that I've actually dealt with that on the miram garments is by half toning the images. So it's to see, but the images are actually not, they're sort of compressed down so that they're made of little individual dots, and there's a lot more space in between the dots. So that actually ends up reducing the kind of the ink levels of the print. And it's actually really, really refreshing to design with these restrictions in mind, because it kind of, sometimes when you are creating a product and you kind of have, like, if the world is your oyster, then it can become a little bit overwhelming just in the sense of the creative process. But having these kind of very strict rules to design by, it is actually really interesting the way that it influences the product in the end. Yeah. And as well, Greg and I also spoke about sort of what kind of printing system it's going to be used to print on the miram, and it's a Canon UV ink system as well. We have been doing research on other ink systems as well and kind of how these compare.
Yeah, I think this one's printed on a Canon UV. It's a pretty beautiful ink job. It's a little glossy. It's pretty durable. We're pretty happy with it. But indeed, it was very interesting to dig into these regulations on compostability. It's funny. Most of these are built for, as you mentioned, the packaging industry, which you could understand why. You know, most litter, most kind of plastics that make it into the environment end up having, well, they're not compostable and they have these inks on them. So regulating that makes a lot of sense. It is, you know, I do have a question about this, how it relates to your design process, Nicole. You didn't think you were overly constrained by, you know, having to dance around this 5% total, only 1% of any one color. That wasn't, as a designer, something that you felt boxed into?
It's something that I acutely remember not considering on my BA. And it's something that I've realized now that if I continue with creative practice in producing fashion products, is something that, unfortunately, it's just going to be something I'm going to have to deal with. And there is often a way around these things. Like for me, it was a case of, to be honest, I'm pretty comfortable with digital print. It's kind of my area, much more so than something like screen printing, which actually I'm super against screen printing, period. But within, it is kind of amazing what you can so quickly achieve when doing a digital print and how you can monitor sort of ink levels in that way. Kind of even sometimes just like turning an image into a different nature. So in the way that, for example, I've half-toned the images for the prints in this capsule collection, it's amazing how much lighter it makes the images. So I think it is just about finding those solutions. And I think something that's been really, really critical with designing this capsule collection for Helsinki Fashion Week is that we've had the time to ask these questions. We've had the time to ask, and I can't express enough how many times Greg and I have gone back and forth with certain possible problems. We've even discussed things like, you know, what thread am I going to use to stitch miram? Because if it has to go back into the ground, then the whole thing has to go back into the ground. So that includes the threads.
Yeah, that topic alone, to be honest, kind of keeps us up at night, because
completely.
For example, we have ambitions for miram in footwear. You can kind of see we can make simple leather goods, things like this, but footwear is obviously more complex. And a big question is, okay, like the go-to high-strength sewing thread for footwear is, guess what? Polyester, or nylon and polyester. and both of those aren't very biodegradable. So it's something that we keep thinking about ourselves. We actually might have a technical solution around the corner, but I don't want to make too many promises because it's a pretty big a big challenge. But indeed, how the total product relates to compostability and material cycles, biodegradability is something that we have ambitions for, but we have to start somewhere, and so we're going to start with some of the bigger materials, the bigger pattern pieces, and go from there. This bit about compromise, or in my language, compromise about you can't use certain colors if they're over 1% or too much color. It's interesting. I would hope, and one of our missions at NFW is actually to build materials that allow you as a designer to do what you want to do without that compromise. And so I'll relate this actually back to your comments about vegan leathers and how vegan leather in the market today is kind of synonymous with plastic. And we kind of think that's a compromise, because if you think where plastic comes from, that's totally not animal cruelty free, right? Like, you can look at any of these ecosystems, you can look at all these oil spills, and there's tons of damage to wonderful creatures and animals from those activities. So it seems a bit of a compromise. And so part of the motivation for Miram was, okay, let's get something that's going to perform like those plastics, that's going to last like those plastics, that can be colored like those plastics, but at the end of the day, it truly doesn't come from harming an animal, and it's truly plant-based, biologically sound for biodegradability and nutrient cycles. And so that's, this bit about uncompromising materials is, I would say that's one of our core values, or our core missions.
But it is amazing. Like, when I feel Miram, it's kind of everything I want as a vegan fashion designer. It's everything I want in a material. So I think that, that progress will continue. I did as well want to address that natural fiber welding is also sponsoring me a little bit less in terms of the quantity, because most of the collection is comprised of Miram. But they are sponsoring me for some pieces that are not made of Miram. So I'm going to now bring up another one of the looks in capsule.
As you bring that up, maybe I'll tell our listeners, our viewers, this other line. So we have a Miram line. Miram kind of stands for these plant-based leathers. Our second material technology is actually where we get our name from, so-called welding fibers, natural fiber welding. And this is going to come out as a brand itself, like Miram. It'll be under a name of Claris. And this is what, Nicole, you're showing here. It's essentially a way to recycle and revitalize natural fibers. And in this case, Nicole, you were interested in essentially getting as much recycled cotton as possible, if I don't if I understand that correctly.
Yeah. So one of my huge issues when designing the pieces that were not in Miram, because it was just so easy with Miram, it's just already in itself this incredible material. But I have tights, I have cotton tops in the capsule collection, and they're pieces that are functional and wearable. And for me, it was important that these pieces are also circular. So when you have something that is nylon, for example, like the top, or like 100% recycled pre-consumer cotton, like the top and the skirt in the slide that I'm showing right now, what was really important for me is that, like you say, I don't compromise on the ethics for these as well. We talked a lot about recycling as well in sort of our past conversations. And one of the huge things that we covered as well that people actually don't know, kind of the general public doesn't know, is that mixed fiber recycling is a huge problem, because it's not physically possible. It's not physically possible to separate a cotton poly top. Like, you literally can't do it. And something like, for example, a stretch denim that consists of 97% cotton, but 3% spandex. We don't have the technology to recycle them. And Greg actually predicts that we won't. It's just not, like, it's not physically possible to separate these fibers. And so you get a circularity problem. Yeah. And so
it's very difficult. maybe hearing my own words about never is a long time. I certainly don't think it'll be anytime soon. It's just a incredibly difficult technical challenge, and this is why I hope in some of your schooling and when we talk with some of the big brands we talk with, this is why they're so interested in these so-called mono materials, like a denim that actually doesn't have stretch perhaps and has a cotton stitching thread and is essentially 100% cotton, because if it's 100% cotton, some of these up and coming recycling technologies, they at least have a chance in hell of being able to recycle it at a meaningful price. But right now, when you buy poly cotton blends, it's you're basically destining that textile for landfill or to be burned. It's just too difficult to get those materials out of there. And so, there's some progress. What comes to mind is Adidas put out a monomaterial shoe recently. I think it's like a TPU, so it's made out of one plastic. Unfortunately, this plastic can be recycled a few times, so it's not terrible, but it essentially was a step forward for them. And shoes are exceptionally difficult because shoes contain dozens of random materials, glues, nylons, etc. So yeah, the recyclability is very difficult. And the way we approach this at NFW is we want to make recycled fibers competitive. This bit about compromise. Most recycled fibers, when you think about recycled cotton, it tends to be viewed as a lower quality, a lower grade textile. It's going to pill more. It's probably not as strong. And our technology just fundamentally changes that. We essentially revitalize it back to virgin or back to something better than virgin. And so in this way, we hope to give cotton a new life, third, fourth, fifth life, but also do so where it's not seen as kind of, oh, that's, I need to mark that down, or that's not a performance textile anymore because it has recycled fiber. We want to change that completely and say your recycled fiber is going to last longer than your virgin equivalent. It's going to feel better. It's going to have better moisture management, all these things. And, all the more bonus if you know that it's recycled, but perhaps you don't and you'll still love it. So that's kind of where we're going on the recycled cotton side. And so excited to see these designs come into reality here in a few weeks, Nicole.
No, and one of the things as well when designing the recycled cotton, I mean, in this look, but sort of the recycled cotton pieces, that one of the hugest things I learned from you was regarding recycling infrastructure and technology, and that is just extremely location dependent at the minute. You sort of talked about how Germany has a really superb collection system, sort of a collection sorting recycling system, where pieces are kind of collected, taken for mechanical recycling, which basically looks like resale or shredding into yarn or insulation material of something. For example, like I know one of NFW's partners in Mexico would accept a cotton t-shirt, use as much of the fiber as possible for shirts, and then the rest for insulation materials. But then you also spoke about chemical recycling, which actually dissolves that t-shirt into like a lyocell or a viscose fiber. So it ends up as a cellulosic fiber, but from this point, it's perpetually recyclable. So it goes from a cotton into that tencel, and then that tencel becomes tencel over and over and over again. And I can't stress enough how impossible this is when you have a mixed fiber garment.
The lyocell process doesn't work very well with polyester. That's for sure. Nicole, I think we're almost running out of time, so we should see if we have any questions.
What was that, Greg?
I said I think we might be running out of time quick. Do we have any questions that we can answer?
I'm having a look. So yes, we do have one question. Once NFW has produced a textile, what is the process of getting it to the customer or we the designers? How is the carbon footprint of freight mitigated?
Oh, very good question. Today, it's not ideal, just because at the scale we're at and where we're located. And what I mean by that specifically is we make everything ourselves out of a little demonstration manufacturing facility in the state of Illinois. So the state of Illinois is not a lot of textile ecosystem. So we're not embedded in Asia yet. We're not in Turkey or Pakistan or some of these other known hubs. We certainly will. So today it's a bit challenging. And how do we mitigate those challenges? To be honest, what we're trying to do is move everything by ocean, vessel, and train. Those two things alone have orders of magnitude lower carbon per unit of movement of goods than cars, trucks, and of course, air travel. And so for us, it's trying to be smart about, if I need to order a bunch of raw latex, how many miles can I ship it from a rail car? How many miles can I ship it on a boat? Those tend to be, no, those don't tend to be, those are the lowest impact per unit of material moved. And then in the future, what we plan to do is literally embed our technology in these ecosystems, in these large industrial hubs, such that if we're getting fiber from, let's say, a local rice mill, we can use the rice hulls to make some textures and some interesting aesthetics for miram. We want to co-locate a factory there, and perhaps that's in Vietnam, where a big shoe kind of manufacturing hub is. So, located right next to where we would be making miram would be the inputs, and then it would go next door to a factory to make the shoe, and then unfortunately would have to take a trip to the consumer. But if that trip to the consumer is again on rail or on ocean freight, it's going to be the lowest impact per mile per weight. So that's kind of the dance we're playing now, where unfortunately just our scale and where we're at in our journey is it's far from ideal, but we certainly have an idea of how to improve it going forward. It's something we monitor actually quite closely, is this transport impact, because we know for the near term, it's going to hurt our numbers, or hurt our LCA numbers. But in the long term, we think we have some interesting solutions where we can co-locate our ability to make materials with where Mother Nature produces some of the beautiful materials that we use. And I think that'll come out in our favor. Well, I guess in everybody's favor.
So that's all the questions for us. I do want to thank you, Greg, and Natural Fiber Welding so much, because honestly, without your sponsorship, the collection just wouldn't have happened. So just kind of that simple. So I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful for the education I've gotten as well from your end.
I will reiterate my opening statement. You have been an absolute wonder to work with, Nicole. Like I said, I think your curiosity and your desire to get to the truth in the work you do will only serve you so well as you go forward. So please don't lose that character. And yeah, very excited to see where your design career goes. Very excited to get you some of our materials. Some of the materials that work well, some of the materials that need a little work, so you can help us understand how to improve it. But looking forward to more collaborations to come.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you everyone that tuned in. Thank you, Greg, for your time.
And thanks to Helsinki Fashion Week for giving us the platform and the ability to make these types of connections. It's been a real joy. So
yes, absolutely.
All right. Bye.
Greg, bye.